Imagine dying 3 times and coming back with a message so chilling, it could change the fate of humanity. That's exactly what happened to an 8-year-old boy who claims he met Jesus and was shown a horrifying vision of our future, a darkness spreading across the world. What did he see beyond the veil of life? And why does he believe we're running out of time? The day everything changed. In 1997, the Whitley family began their Sunday just like any other. The morning was calm, the roads were quiet, and life felt predictable. Julie and Andy Whitley had just left church, their spirits lifted by the peaceful service, as they drove home with their young son Landon, seated securely in the back. It was the kind of ordinary day that held no hint of the extraordinary tragedy about to unfold. As they entered a familiar intersection, the tranquility was shattered in a single, devastating moment. An ambulance, rushing to save a life with its sirens screaming, tore into the crossing. The driver, caught in the urgency of the call, didn't see the Whitley's car until it was too late. The impact was violent and catastrophic. The family's vehicle crumpled under the force, glass fragments exploding in every direction as the car spun wildly before grinding to a halt. In an instant, their quiet morning had turned into a scene of unimaginable destruction. First responders arrived swiftly, but the wreckage painted a grim picture. Andy's life had been cut short in the collision, leaving Julie and Landon's fates uncertain. Julie, pinned in the mangled remains of the car, was gravely injured but alive. Landon, on the other hand, showed no signs of life. Paramedics fought to revive him, their every effort seeming futile. At the hospital, the situation grew even darker. Landon was declared clinically dead. His small heart had stopped beating. Julie, barely clinging to consciousness, learned that her husband had died instantly, and now her son was gone too. Grief overwhelmed her as she tried to process the unbearable loss. But just as doctors began preparing to confirm Landon's death, something unexplainable happened. Against all odds, his heart began to beat again. This miraculous turn seemed to defy every medical expectation, but it was only the beginning of Landon's battle. Within hours, his heart stopped twice more. Each time, the medical team fought relentlessly to pull him back from the brink of death. It was as if Landon was teetering on the edge of two worlds, one drawing him away and the other desperately trying to hold him here. By the third revival, the staff could only marvel at the boy, who had now been declared dead 3 times, yet continued to survive. Even so, survival came with a heavy price. The doctors cautioned Julie about the likely outcomes. They explained that Landon's brain had been deprived of oxygen during the times his heart had stopped. If he woke up, they warned, he would almost certainly face significant brain damage. The child she had known might no longer exist as he once was. But Julie wasn't ready to accept that fate. Despite the overwhelming grief of losing her husband and the uncertainty surrounding Landon's future, she refused to give up hope. She spent every waking moment at his bedside, her prayers raw and desperate. She didn't whisper her pleas to God. She cried out with every ounce of her soul, begging for her son to return to her whole. Days turned into weeks, and Landon remained in a coma, motionless and sustained only by machines. To the medical team, it seemed his spirit had already departed, leaving behind only a fragile body that refused to let go. But Julie held firm, her hope unwavering. She refused to believe this was the end of her son's story. During those agonizing weeks, one question lingered. Where was Landon during this time? What could a boy who had technically died 3 times have experienced in those moments when his heart stopped? And if he woke up, what truths or memories might he carry back with him? Landon Whitley's unbelievable brush with death. The story of Landon Whitley is one of resilience, heartbreak, and miracles. It defies logic, pushes the boundaries of medical science, and forces us to reconsider what we think we know about life and death. Declared clinically dead not once, but 3 separate times in a single day, Landon's fight for survival remains an extraordinary tale of determination and hope. To understand the magnitude of his experience, we must delve into the painstaking efforts of the medical staff, the agony of his grieving mother, and the mystery surrounding Landon's inexplicable survival. This story begins in the aftermath of a devastating car accident that claimed his father's life and left young Landon at the mercy of a team of doctors fighting to keep him alive. When Landon was rushed to the hospital, his condition was dire. His pulse was faint, his breathing erratic, and his body bore the signs of immense trauma. Every second counted as the emergency team scrambled to stabilize him. Despite their tireless efforts, Landon's heart gave out, and the monitor flatlined. At just 8 years old, he was declared dead for the first time. Inside the operating room, the atmosphere was frantic yet somber. Machines beeped with urgency, nurses shouted orders, and doctors exchanged resigned glances as they called the time of death. Meanwhile, Julie Whitley, Landon's mother, lay in another hospital room, barely conscious from her own injuries. She had already been told that her husband hadn't survived the crash. Now she faced the unimaginable reality of losing her son as well. But just as the medical team began stepping away from Landon's lifeless body, a faint blip appeared on the monitor. A nurse, noticing the anomaly, alerted the team. Landon's heart had started beating again. The room erupted into controlled chaos as the doctors returned to his side, working feverishly to stabilize him. For a moment, it seemed like a miracle. Landon was back, but his fight was far from over. Less than an hour after being revived, Landon's heart stopped once more. This time, the team was less hopeful. Reviving someone after a cardiac arrest is rare. Doing it twice in such a short span seemed nearly impossible. Yet, against all odds, they managed to bring him back again. His pulse was weak, his condition critical, but he was alive, barely clinging to life. Julie, recovering from surgery, was slowly being informed of her son's condition. When she learned that Landon's heart had stopped twice, her grief was overwhelming. Yet there was also a spark of hope. If her son had survived this much, she believed he could survive anything. She clung to that belief, even as the doctors prepared her for the worst. Later that day, during an emergency procedure to address his internal injuries, Landon's heart stopped for a third time. The lead surgeon, Dr. Michael Anderson, described it as one of the most harrowing moments of his career. "We had already pushed the limits of what we could do," he later admitted. "Landon's body was giving up, and we weren't sure if we could bring him back again." Some members of the medical team hesitated to attempt another revival, worried about the strain on his body and the potential for irreversible brain damage. But a younger doctor in the room insisted on trying. With grim determination, they administered another series of defibrillator shocks. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, miraculously, Landon's heart began to beat again. This third revival left the medical team stunned. Surviving one cardiac arrest is rare, 2 is extraordinary, but 3 in a single day? It was unheard of. Some whispered about divine intervention, while others credited Landon's youth and resilience. Regardless of the explanation, one fact was clear: this child was a fighter. Despite the miraculous revivals, Landon's condition remained critical. He was placed in a medically induced coma to minimize brain activity and allow his body to heal. Machines kept him alive, monitoring his every vital sign. For Julie, the wait was excruciating. Confined to her hospital bed, she couldn't be by her son's side as much as she wanted. Instead, she prayed, desperate prayers that came from the deepest corners of her heart. The doctors warned her that even if Landon survived, he would likely face severe neurological damage. The prolonged lack of oxygen to his brain during each cardiac arrest made a full recovery almost impossible. But Julie refused to believe it. "He's going to wake up," she insisted to the doctors, "and he's going to be my Landon." As news of the accident spread, the Whitley family's small town came together in an outpouring of support. Friends, neighbors, and church members organized prayer vigils, sent flowers, and delivered meals to the hospital. Strangers reached out with messages of hope and encouragement. Despite the overwhelming grief of losing her husband and the uncertainty surrounding Landon's survival, Julie drew strength from this support network. Still, the waiting was agonizing. Every day brought small signs of progress: a slight improvement in Landon's oxygen levels, a decrease in swelling, but no guarantee of recovery. Julie clung to every glimmer of hope, refusing to let go of her faith. While Landon lay motionless in his coma, questions lingered. What happens when someone is clinically dead? Where does their consciousness go? And in Landon's case, what had he experienced during those moments when his heart had stopped? Later, when Landon finally woke up, he would describe vivid memories of those moments. Though he was too young to fully articulate them at the time, His recollections hinted at something extraordinary, something beyond the realm of what we understand. But for now, his focus was purely on survival. As weeks turned into months, Landon slowly began to recover. The road was long and uncertain, filled with setbacks and small victories. Each milestone, opening his eyes, moving a finger, responding to his mother's voice, felt like a triumph. The doctors, initially skeptical about his chances, were astonished by his progress. Julie's unwavering belief in her son was vindicated. While the medical team had prepared her for a future of severe disabilities, Landon began to show signs of regaining his full cognitive abilities. It was as though his body and mind were determined to defy every grim prognosis. Landon's survival points to the strength of the human spirit, the power of modern medicine, and perhaps something more, something we can't fully explain. How does a child survive 3 cardiac arrests in a single day? Was it luck, divine intervention, or sheer willpower? And what did Landon see during those moments when his heart had stopped? His experiences would later raise profound questions about life, death, and what lies beyond. For Julie, however, the answers didn't matter as much as the fact that her son was alive. After losing her husband, she had been given a second chance with Landon, a chance she would never take for granted. Landon's journey is far from ordinary. It is a story of loss, resilience, and miracles, one that continues to inspire and challenge our understanding of life's most fragile moments. A glimpse beyond. Landon Whitley's story transcends the ordinary, a narrative that challenges conventional understanding of life, death, and what lies beyond. As his body lay motionless, tethered to machines in the cold sterility of a hospital room, his consciousness ventured into realms that defy scientific explanation. With his heart stopping 3 times during a harrowing battle for survival, Landon wasn't simply teetering on the brink of death. He was exploring a place where the boundaries of existence blurred. When Landon awoke weeks after his ordeal, the tale he recounted was nothing short of extraordinary. He described entering a realm unlike anything depicted in medical textbooks or imagined in near-death accounts. It wasn't darkness, nor the commonly reported tunnel of light. Instead, Landon found himself in a field suffused with a radiance that felt alive. This light wasn't harsh or artificial. It pulsed with warmth and vitality, bathing everything in shimmering hues more vivid than anything on Earth. Despite the trauma his body had endured, Landon recalled feeling a profound sense of peace. Fear was absent, replaced by a strange but comforting serenity. However, the tranquility was only the beginning. As he wandered through this otherworldly place, figures began to emerge from the light. To Landon's astonishment, these weren't faceless strangers. They were people he somehow recognized, though he couldn't explain how. Some of these figures, he later explained, were relatives who had passed long before he was born. He recognized them as though their faces had been etched into his memory. But among these familiar presences were 2 children whose appearances were strikingly specific. Landon described their features in vivid detail: their curly hair, their radiant smiles, and the way their eyes sparkled with warmth. These children weren't people Landon had known in life, but his connection to them felt unshakable. When he described this experience to his mother, Julie, her reaction was one of shock and disbelief. Landon was unknowingly recounting the existence of 2 siblings she had lost to miscarriages, siblings he had never been told about. The details he shared were far too precise for an 8-year-old to invent. This revelation left Julie grappling with emotions she could barely process: grief for the children she had lost, and wonder at the possibility that they still existed in some form, waiting for her son in this ethereal realm. The communication Landon experienced in this place was unlike anything on Earth. He explained that the figures didn't speak in words, but conveyed thoughts and emotions directly into his mind. It was as though they bypassed language altogether, planting understanding within him in a way that was instantaneous and complete. The children told him he wasn't meant to stay, that his time hadn't come yet. They assured him he still had a purpose to fulfill and promised he would see them again one day. As Landon continued his journey through this radiant landscape, the light around him grew brighter, and the air seemed to hum with an energy that was both overwhelming and comforting. It was then that he encountered a figure who, he said, transformed everything: Jesus. Without needing an introduction, Landon knew who he was. The presence radiated an indescribable combination of love, light, and understanding that seemed to envelop Landon's entire being. In this encounter, Landon was shown glimpses of a life he hadn't yet lived. It was as though he were watching fragments of a movie about his own future, scenes filled with people and moments that were yet to come. Jesus conveyed a clear message. Landon's life had purpose, and his mission was far from over. He was to return to Earth and share what he had experienced, offering hope and faith to those who needed it most. Yet Landon's experience wasn't entirely serene. He spoke of a darker presence lingering at the periphery of this radiant place. It never approached him or interfered, but its existence was undeniable. Landon struggled to articulate the feeling, describing it as a shadowy reminder of something ominous. Was it a warning? A symbol of what could have been? Or was it a manifestation of the struggles awaiting him in life? Whatever it represented, the mere mention of this presence left listeners unsettled, questioning the duality of what lies beyond life as we know it. Just as suddenly as the journey began, it ended. Landon described feeling an invisible force pulling him back, dragging him away from the light and the figures he had encountered. The transition was swift and disorienting, like being swept through a tunnel of warmth and energy. When he opened his eyes, it wasn't the glowing expanse of the otherworldly realm that greeted him, but the stark, fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The boy who returned wasn't the same as the one who had left. Landon's experiences had marked him in profound ways. His descriptions of the realm beyond life were so vivid, so detailed, that they defied skepticism. He had glimpsed something most of us can only speculate about, a reality that exists beyond the physical world, where life, death, and purpose intertwine in ways we can barely comprehend. As Landon shared his story in the years that followed, the questions surrounding his experience remained. What did his journey mean? Was it evidence of an afterlife, a divine message, or simply the brain's response to extreme trauma? And more importantly, would the world be ready to embrace the truths Landon had brought back with him? A return that defied all expectations. The room was silent as Landon Whitley opened his eyes. Nurses and doctors who had been tirelessly monitoring his fragile condition for weeks froze in stunned disbelief. This was no ordinary awakening. Landon, declared dead 3 separate times, had returned to life. His calm demeanor seemed at odds with the trauma he had endured, as if he had awoken from the most peaceful dream rather than a fight for survival. Julie, his mother, had spent every waking moment by his bedside, her prayers and hopes wavering between desperation and faith. When Landon's eyes met hers, relief washed over her like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched his hand, murmuring words of gratitude to the heavens. Yet her joy quickly gave way to astonishment when Landon began to speak. His voice, weak from weeks of silence, carried an unshakable clarity as he recounted something extraordinary. He described a place far beyond Earth, a realm suffused with light and peace. This wasn't a disjointed rambling or a child's wild imagination. Landon spoke with an eloquence that belied his age, his words imbued with a sense of depth and understanding far beyond his years. The hospital staff, Julie included, listened in stunned silence as he painted a picture of an ethereal world. Landon described a realm teeming with radiant beauty, a place where golden streets stretched endlessly and everything seemed to pulse with an indescribable energy. He spoke of a light that was not only bright, but alive, a warm presence that wrapped around him with a love so profound it brought tears to his eyes. But what truly shocked Julie were the figures Landon claimed to have met in this place. Among the beings of light, Landon recognized 2 children who stood out. He described them in vivid detail, their smiles, the way their hair curled, the way their eyes sparkled with joy. Landon spoke of them as if he had known them his entire life. Julie froze as he relayed their presence, her breath catching in her throat. These weren't just any children. They were her miscarried babies, siblings Landon had never been told about. The accuracy of his descriptions was undeniable, down to the smallest details of their appearance. Julie, who had kept the pain of those losses buried deep within her heart, was overcome with emotion. Landon couldn't have known about them. There was no way he could have fabricated such an account. Yet here he was, recounting their existence with a calm certainty that left no room for doubt. As Landon continued, his story grew even more astonishing. He described a radiant figure who seemed to encompass the very essence of love and light, Jesus. Landon's encounter with him was profound. He said Jesus didn't speak with words, but communicated directly to his soul, filling him with a sense of purpose and peace. Jesus showed him glimpses of his future, moments that Landon had not yet lived, as if to reassure him that his journey on earth was far from over. This revelation left everyone in the room grappling with a mix of awe and disbelief. Some dismissed Landon's account as a hallucination or the product of a brain starved of oxygen. Skeptical doctors pointed to studies on near-death experiences, explaining that such visions could be explained by chemical reactions or neural activity during moments of trauma. Yet even the skeptics struggled to explain the extraordinary details Landon provided, details he could not have known through any natural means. Word of Landon's story began to spread. Family members, friends, and even strangers arrived at the hospital, eager to hear his account firsthand. Some sought comfort in his words, hoping they would affirm their belief in an afterlife. Others were drawn purely by curiosity, compelled by the sheer improbability of his experience. Regardless of their reasons, all who listened to Landon left with a profound sense of wonder. Julie, meanwhile, was experiencing her own internal struggle. While she was overjoyed to have her son back, the loss of her husband Andy weighed heavily on her heart. Landon's words, however, brought her a measure of solace. He described seeing Andy in the radiant realm, standing among the other figures of light with a reassuring smile. "He's okay, Mom," Landon told her softly. "He's safe." Though these words brought comfort, Julie couldn't help but wrestle with the larger questions. Why had Landon been sent back when Andy had not? Was there a reason for this divergence? Or was it simply the result of random chance? The answers to these questions remained elusive, adding another layer of mystery to an already miraculous story. Landon, however, seemed to carry a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. Despite the trauma his body had endured, his recovery defied medical expectations. Doctors had warned Julie of potential neurological damage due to the prolonged periods his heart had stopped. But Landon emerged not just intact, but thriving. He retained his memories, his personality, and his physical strength. Yet there was something undeniably different about him. The boy who returned from the brink of death spoke with a wisdom that seemed almost otherworldly. His words carried a weight and conviction that were impossible to ignore. He shared his experience not with the hesitancy of a child, but with the assurance of someone who had seen something profound. Central to his story was a mission. Landon claimed that Jesus had given him a task to share his experience with the world, to spread a message of hope and faith. He didn't see this as a burden, but as a calling, something he was determined to fulfill. Even as a child, he spoke of his purpose with a seriousness that inspired those around him. For Julie, Landon's miraculous return brought both joy and an unshakable awareness of life's fragility. While she would always mourn Andy, she found strength in her son's survival and the hope his story brought to others. Landon had returned with a message, and whether the world was ready to hear it or not, he was prepared to share it. Landon's journey didn't end in that hospital room. His story was only just beginning, a tale of faith, love, and the unexplainable that would continue to touch lives and challenge beliefs for years to come. Landon's visions. Landon Whitley's near-death experience was not the typical hazy recollection of an otherworldly realm. Instead, his descriptions were vivid, startling, and left those who heard them questioning their understanding of life and what lies beyond. Landon's story wasn't just about peace or serenity. It was a detailed journey through a place so profoundly mysterious and extraordinary that it reshaped the lives of everyone who encountered it. Landon began his account with a description of a light. This wasn't the kind of blinding light often described in near-death experiences, but something entirely unique. Landon explained that the light wasn't merely seen, it was felt. It surrounded him, cradling him like a warm, protective embrace. It wasn't just luminous, it carried a palpable sense of life, as though it were a living, breathing entity. The air in this realm, he said, vibrated with an energy that resonated deep within his soul. As Landon moved through this surreal space, figures began to emerge from the glowing expanse. At first they were faint silhouettes, but as he drew closer, their features became clear. These weren't strangers, they were people he instinctively recognized, though he couldn't explain how. Later, he would identify them as family members who had passed away long before his birth. Despite never meeting these relatives in life, Landon spoke of them with a familiarity that seemed impossible to fake. Among the figures were two small children who stood apart from the others. Landon's voice trembled as he recounted their presence. They didn't speak with words, but their smiles radiated warmth and love. They reached out to him, their small hands extended in a gesture of welcome. Landon felt an unbreakable bond with them, though he had no siblings, or so he thought. When Landon described these children to his mother, Julie, her reaction was one of shock and disbelief. He spoke of their faces, their features, and their joy with an accuracy that left her breathless. These weren't just any children. They were the siblings Julie had lost to miscarriages years before Landon's birth, a sorrowful chapter of her life she had never shared with anyone, including her son. Yet here he was, recounting their presence in remarkable detail. The realization brought Julie to tears as she grappled with the inexplicable connection between her lost children and Landon's miraculous journey. Landon's descriptions of the realm extended beyond the figures he encountered. He painted a picture of heaven that was both infinite and intimate, a place that stretched endlessly yet felt deeply personal. Roads paved with gold shimmered under a radiant light, but this wasn't gold as we know it. Instead of reflecting light, it seemed to emit its own, glowing with an otherworldly brilliance. The trees, the air, and even the sky itself seemed alive, humming with an energy that was as soothing as it was awe-inspiring. But the most profound moment of Landon's journey came when he encountered a figure unlike any other. Without needing an introduction, Landon knew it was Jesus. The presence of Jesus, he said, was overwhelming in its love and warmth. There was no need for words. His essence filled Landon with a peace so profound it brought tears to his eyes as he later recounted it. Jesus didn't merely stand before Landon, he showed him glimpses of a future that hadn't yet unfolded. It was as though Landon were watching a movie of his life, with scenes flashing before him of moments he had yet to experience. These weren't commands or predestined paths, but gentle guidance, showing him the possibilities of what his life could hold. Landon described how each vision seemed to emphasize one core message: his life had purpose, and his journey on earth wasn't finished. Among the visions, however, was one that haunted Landon. He saw a version of Earth that was covered in darkness, a world weighed down by human suffering and despair. Faces contorted in anguish called out for help, yet there was an undercurrent of hope woven through the scene. Jesus conveyed, without speaking, that Landon's mission was to bring light into this darkness. His purpose was to share what he had seen and offer hope to a world that desperately needed it. Landon's experience wasn't without its shadows. Just beyond the light and beauty of the heavenly realm, he sensed something darker. He never saw it directly, but its presence was undeniable. A cold, looming force that seemed to linger at the edges of his vision. Landon couldn't explain what it was, but he described it as a reminder of the choices humanity faces and the consequences of straying from the light. The chilling sensation stayed with him even after he returned to his body, a stark contrast to the warmth and love of the realm he had just left. When Landon asked if he could stay in this place, the answer wasn't what he expected. Jesus told him it wasn't his time. Landon felt torn, desperate to remain in a place that felt more like home than anything he had ever known. Yet he understood there was more for him to do. His time on earth wasn't over, and his purpose was only beginning to unfold. The transition back was anything but gentle. Landon described it as being yanked through a tunnel of light and sound, an overwhelming vortex that pulled him away from the serenity of heaven and thrust him back into the harsh reality of his physical body. When he opened his eyes, the sterile glow of fluorescent hospital lights greeted him, and the concerned faces of doctors and nurses came into focus. The details Landon shared upon waking left those around him speechless. His vivid descriptions of heaven, the golden streets, the interconnected energy, and the figures he encountered defied explanation. Skeptics tried to rationalize his account as a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation, yet even they couldn't explain how Landon knew about the siblings his mother had lost, or the emotions he described with such maturity. For Julie, Landon's journey was both a comfort and a mystery. While his visions brought solace in knowing her lost children were safe and her husband was at peace, they also left her grappling with questions. Why had Landon been given this experience? Why was he sent back while others, like her husband, remained in the heavenly realm? A profound encounter. Landon Whitley's experience was a moment that went far beyond human comprehension. A meeting with Jesus himself. But this wasn't the awestruck description one might expect from an 8-year-old boy. Landon spoke with an unsettling calmness, recounting an encounter so vivid and transformative that it seemed permanently etched into his very being. What he revealed wasn't just inspiring, it was haunting, leaving everyone who heard it grappling with questions about life, death, and what lies beyond. When Landon first saw Jesus, there was no need for introductions. It wasn't like recognizing a friend or even a family member. It was deeper, more innate. You just know it's him, Landon explained later. The presence of Jesus was unmistakable, a radiance so intense and pure that it didn't hurt to look at, but instead felt as though it was pulling him in. Landon described it as more than light. It was a force, a love so profound that it washed away every fear, doubt, and pain he had ever known. The first thing Jesus did was reassure him. Landon felt an overwhelming sense of calm, a peace that permeated every fiber of his being. All the uncertainty and confusion from his ordeal melted away. But this serenity was quickly replaced by something more urgent. Landon said Jesus didn't just want to comfort him, he wanted to show him something. In that moment, Landon was made to understand the fragility of the world, the struggles people face, and the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of life. What followed were visions. Landon described them as flashes of scenes, like watching fragments of a movie reel. These weren't memories or dreams. They were moments from a future he had yet to live. He saw himself growing older, facing challenges and making decisions. He saw people he hadn't met yet and places he didn't recognize. Though overwhelming, it was clear these glimpses were not random. They were moments he was meant to prepare for, part of a path he hadn't yet walked. One of the most haunting visions was of a world shrouded in chaos. Landon described cities falling apart, people crying out in anguish, and a darkness spreading across the earth. Yet amidst the despair, there was a flicker of light, small but real. Jesus showed him this light and made it clear that it was no ordinary symbol. It was hope, fragile yet powerful, something that could be nurtured to counterbalance the growing darkness. Then came the message. Without words but with an unshakable clarity, Jesus communicated something that would stay with Landon for the rest of his life. You have to go back. The meaning was undeniable and burned into Landon's very soul. His purpose was to return to earth, share what he had seen, and let people know that heaven is real, that their lives have meaning, and that they are never alone. But the message wasn't just one of comfort. It carried an urgency that Landon couldn't ignore. Desperate to remain in the place that felt more like home than anywhere he had ever known, Landon begged to stay. He told Jesus he didn't want to return to earth, where pain and uncertainty awaited him. But Jesus was firm, not with harshness, but with a love so profound that it left no room for debate. It's not your time, Jesus conveyed, not with spoken words, but with a presence so powerful that it filled Landon with understanding. Landon later said it felt as though Jesus looked straight into his soul, seeing every flaw, every fear, and every hope, and loving him unconditionally anyway. But this profound moment wasn't without its shadows. As Jesus spoke, Landon became aware of something lingering at the edges of the light. He described it as a cold, heavy presence, an ominous force that didn't belong in the radiant warmth of heaven. It wasn't a figure or a shape, but it was there, watching. Landon couldn't fully explain what it was, but he said it felt like a reminder. For all the love and beauty of heaven, there was a stark contrast waiting for those who chose a different path. Jesus didn't acknowledge the shadow directly. Instead, he focused entirely on Landon, showing him more glimpses of what his life could mean if he embraced his mission. Landon saw people smiling and crying, their lives changed because of the message he was meant to deliver. He saw hope blooming in places where despair had once reigned. But with these visions came a heavy burden. Returning to Earth wouldn't be easy. Landon would face doubt, ridicule, and the crushing weight of knowing what lay beyond while living in a world that might never fully believe him. And then suddenly it was over. Landon described being pulled away from Jesus, yanked back through a tunnel of light and sound. The warmth and serenity faded, replaced by the stark, sterile glow of hospital lights. He said it felt like falling, though not in a frightening way, more like being gently placed back where he was meant to be. When Landon opened his eyes, he was back in his broken, fragile body. The beeping of machines and the worried faces of nurses greeted him. But the boy who returned wasn't the same as the one who had left. Landon carried with him the memory of a love so profound that it transcended words, as well as a mission that would shape the rest of his life. Yet even as Landon shared his story, questions remained. What was the shadow he had felt? Was it a reminder of what's at stake, or something far more sinister? And would the world be ready to hear the message that had been entrusted to him? A messenger of hope. Landon Whitley's story was never meant to stay confined within the walls of the hospital, where his miraculous survival stunned everyone who witnessed it. From the moment he opened his eyes and began speaking of what he had seen, it was clear he carried something extraordinary. His journey beyond death wasn't just a personal experience. It was a call to action, a divine mission to share a message of hope and faith with a world that desperately needed it. But the weight of such a mission wasn't something an 8-year-old boy could fully comprehend. What followed was a lifetime of discovery, challenges, and encounters that would shape not only Landon's life, but the lives of countless others. When Landon first began speaking about his experience, it was raw and unfiltered. He didn't craft his words carefully or try to make his story fit anyone's expectations. Instead, he recounted his journey as it unfolded in his memory. The hospital staff, still processing the impossibility of his survival, became the first witnesses to his testimony. Doctors and nurses, some hardened by years of exposure to trauma, found themselves captivated by his words. Landon described in detail the golden streets that didn't just reflect light, but seemed to generate it. He spoke of a warmth that enveloped him, a peace so profound that it felt like nothing on earth could compare. But it wasn't just the beauty of his descriptions that left the room in silence. It was the shadow. Landon spoke of a presence that didn't belong in the light, a shadow that lingered just at the edges of his vision. He couldn't explain it fully, but its existence was undeniable. While the rest of heaven radiated love and peace, this shadow carried an entirely different energy, cold, heavy, and foreboding. Landon didn't know what it was, but its memory stayed with him, even as he returned to life. As Landon's story spread beyond the hospital, it began to draw attention from family, friends, and strangers alike. People traveled to hear the boy who had been declared dead 3 times and come back to share what he had seen. Each retelling brought new reactions, tears, questions, even disbelief. For many, Landon's words offered comfort, particularly to those who had lost loved ones. They clung to his descriptions of heaven, of the radiant figures who greeted him with open arms, and the love that seemed to saturate every corner of the realm. But for others, his account raised more questions than answers. Julie, Landon's mother, experienced this dichotomy firsthand. On one hand, she was filled with gratitude for her son's survival and moved by the impact his story had on others. On the other hand, her heart still ached with the loss of her husband, Andy. Landon's words about seeing Andy in heaven brought her comfort, but also stirred a longing that was difficult to bear. Why had her husband stayed while her son was sent back? Was there a reason, or was it simply chance? Julie found herself grappling with questions she couldn't answer, even as she stood by her son's side, watching his story unfold. As Landon grew older, his story began to take on a life of its own. Invitations poured in from churches, community centers, and even conferences asking him to share his experience. Despite his young age, Landon had a presence that drew people in. He wasn't polished or rehearsed. He spoke with the sincerity of someone who had lived through something extraordinary. His descriptions were detailed and specific, and his words carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. One of the most haunting aspects of Landon's testimony was his description of the shadow. Whenever he mentioned it, the room would fall silent. People leaned in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Landon never claimed to know exactly what the shadow was, but he was certain it wasn't good. It didn't feel like the rest of heaven, he would say. It felt out of place, like it wasn't supposed to be there. Landon didn't dwell on the shadow, though. His focus remained on the message Jesus had given him, a message of hope, faith, and purpose. He spoke about the love he felt in heaven, a love so overwhelming and unconditional that it seemed to erase every fear and doubt. It wasn't like the love we know here on earth, Landon would say. It didn't depend on anything. It just was. But Landon's story wasn't universally accepted. As his account gained more attention, it also drew criticism. Skeptics dismissed his visions as the hallucinations of a dying brain, a product of oxygen deprivation and neural activity during cardiac arrest. Others accused him of fabricating the entire experience for attention. These criticisms didn't seem to bother Landon much. He was, after all, still a child. But for Julie, they were deeply personal. She knew her son wasn't lying. She had seen the changes in him since the accident, the way he carried himself, and the depth of his understanding. "You can see it in his eyes," Julie often said. "He's not the same boy he was before. He's seen something that changed him forever." One of the most emotional revelations in Landon's story involved the siblings he met in heaven. Landon described two small children who greeted him with warmth and love, their smiles filling him with an unshakable sense of connection. Julie was overcome with emotion when she heard this. Landon's descriptions were too specific, too accurate to be a coincidence. He described the way they looked, the way they moved, and even the sound of their laughter. All details that matched the siblings Julie had lost to miscarriages before Landon was born. She had never spoken about them, not to Landon or anyone else, yet here he was, recounting their presence as if he had known them his whole life. As Landon grew, he began to understand the weight of his mission. The responsibility of sharing his story wasn't easy, especially as he faced questions he couldn't always answer. People wanted to know what heaven was like, what Jesus looked like, and whether their loved ones were there. Landon did his best to respond, but he was careful not to overstep. "I don't know everything," he would say. "I just know what I saw." Despite the challenges, Landon remained committed to his purpose. He believed his story had the power to change lives, to bring hope to those who were struggling, and to remind people that they were never truly alone. For many, his words did just that. People who had lost loved ones found comfort in his descriptions of heaven, clinging to the idea that their departed family members were safe and happy in the afterlife. But Landon's story wasn't just about comfort, it was also a challenge. The shadow he described forced people to confront difficult questions about life, death, and the choices we make. For some, it was a warning, a reminder of the consequences of straying from the light. For others, it was a mystery, an unsettling element that refused to be ignored. Landon didn't claim to have all the answers. "I'm not here to convince anyone," he often said. "I'm just here to tell my story." Yet his words carried a power that transcended skepticism. Whether they believed him or not, people couldn't deny the conviction in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes, and the impact of his message. For Julie, watching her son grow into his role as a messenger was both inspiring and bittersweet. She was proud of him, but she also knew the burden he carried. Sharing his story often meant reliving the trauma of the accident and the loss of his father. Yet Landon embraced his mission with a maturity far beyond his years, determined to honor the purpose he had been given. As the years went by, Landon's story continued to evolve. He began to see his role not just as a storyteller, but as a guide, someone who could help others navigate their own questions about faith, loss, and purpose. His journey was far from over, but one thing remained constant: the message he had been sent back to deliver. Landon's account wasn't just a tale of survival, it was a reminder of the profound mysteries that lie beyond the world we know. It challenged listeners to look beyond the surface of their lives, to consider what truly matters, and to find hope in the knowledge that something greater awaits us all. For those who heard his story, one question lingered above all others. Could this boy, with his vivid memories of heaven and his unshakable faith, truly hold the key to understanding what lies beyond death? Landon's journey is far from over, but his story continues to inspire, challenge, and remind us that even in the darkest moments, there is light, and that light is never far away. The debate over Landon's shocking journey. Landon Whitley's incredible journey from the brink of death brought with it a ripple effect that extended far beyond his immediate circle. His story wasn't merely an account of survival, it became a source of inspiration, hope, and controversy. For some, his testimony was an undeniable glimpse into what lies beyond life, a message filled with reassurance and meaning. For others, it was a narrative ripe for dissection, skepticism, and disbelief. Regardless of where people stood, Landon's account had a magnetic pull that made it impossible to ignore. When Landon first began sharing his experience, his audience consisted of family and hospital staff, all astonished by the sheer impossibility of his survival. His descriptions of what he encountered, roads paved with light, beings radiating warmth, and a sense of love so deep it felt alive, left even seasoned medical professionals at a loss for words. But as word of his account spread, the story took on a life of its own. It wasn't long before media outlets, religious communities, and skeptics alike began dissecting every detail of what Landon claimed to have seen. What set Landon's testimony apart wasn't just the beauty of his descriptions. It was the chilling mention of a shadow, a dark, foreboding presence lingering at the edges of heaven's radiance. While most of his journey through the afterlife was marked by peace and acceptance, this shadow introduced an unsettling dimension. For believers, it represented a stark reminder of the ongoing battle between good and evil, light and darkness. Skeptics, on the other hand, dismissed it as a creation of Landon's subconscious mind, a byproduct of trauma or fear. This shadow became the focal point of countless discussions and debates. Was it a warning of what awaits those who stray from the path of light? A reminder of the choices that define human lives? Or was it simply the brain's way of processing the unknown? Landon himself never claimed to have the answers. He only knew what he had seen and felt. It didn't feel like it belonged there, he explained. It was cold and distant, but I knew it was real. As Landon's story gained prominence, it began to draw attention from all corners of society. Families grappling with grief sought him out, hoping to find comfort in his words. To them, his descriptions of heaven offered reassurance that their loved ones were safe and embraced by unconditional love. Yet skeptics and critics also emerged, questioning the authenticity of his testimony. Some suggested that his memories were shaped by cultural and religious influences. Others went further, accusing him of being manipulated to promote a narrative. Julie, Landon's mother, became a steadfast defender of her son's experience. Having witnessed the miraculous nature of his survival firsthand, she was unshaken in her belief that what Landon described was genuine. "He's not making this up," Julie often said, her voice steady yet emotional. "There's no way he could know the things he does, especially about the siblings I lost." Landon's detailed account of 2 siblings he had never met, whom Julie had miscarried before his birth, left even skeptics grappling for an explanation. As his story continued to gain momentum, Landon faced mounting scrutiny. A prominent neuroscientist publicly criticized his account, attributing his visions to oxygen deprivation and the brain's natural response to trauma. According to this theory, the golden streets, angelic figures, and even the shadow were nothing more than chemical reactions occurring as Landon's body fought to survive. The critique spread quickly, casting doubt on his testimony and turning Landon and Julie into targets for public skepticism. But instead of diminishing Landon's story, the criticism only amplified it. Others who had experienced near-death events began coming forward, sharing accounts that echoed Landon's in striking ways. Some spoke of similar sensations of overwhelming love and peace, while others described encounters with divine beings. Many even mentioned shadows or dark presences, lending credibility to the idea that Landon's story was part of a larger, universal phenomenon. Julie found solace in these shared experiences. While the doubts and accusations weighed heavily on her, The growing number of voices affirming Landon's account reassured her that her son wasn't alone. "People want answers," Julie said. "They're searching for something that makes sense of the world. And Landon's story gives them that." For Landon, the growing interest in his testimony wasn't about proving skeptics wrong or winning arguments. His focus remained on those who needed to hear his message: grieving families, individuals questioning their purpose, and those searching for meaning in the face of life's uncertainties. To these people, Landon's words were more than a story. They were a lifeline, a reminder that there was something greater waiting beyond the struggles of earthly life. Yet the weight of his testimony wasn't easy to bear. Landon often reflected on the shadow and its implications. While heaven had filled him with peace and purpose, the shadow had left him with a lingering sense of urgency. He felt as though he had been shown both the beauty of what awaits and the stakes of the choices we make in life. "The light was real, and so was the shadow," Landon explained. "I think we all have to decide which one we move toward." The more Landon shared his story, the more patterns he noticed in how people responded. Believers were drawn to the light he described, captivated by the promise of eternal love and reunion with loved ones. Skeptics, however, fixated on the shadow. To them, it was the one part of his account that felt like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Why would such a dark presence exist in a place so radiant? Was it a test, a warning, or something else entirely? Landon never pretended to have all the answers. When pressed for explanations, he would simply say, "I don't know everything. I just know what I saw." His humility and honesty only deepened the impact of his story. People didn't just listen, they felt his sincerity, his conviction, and the profound truth that lay at the heart of his experience. Over time, Landon began to recall additional details about his journey, memories that seemed to emerge as he grew older. These recollections added new layers to his story, reigniting interest and debate. Among them was a chilling realization. The shadow grew darker the closer he came to returning to his body. This revelation sent shivers through those who heard it. Was the shadow trying to stop him from leaving heaven? Or was it a reminder of the challenges that awaited him on earth? A mission of light and shadows. Landon Whitley didn't just return to earth with a story to tell. He came back with a purpose that would span his entire lifetime. What started as a near-death experience transformed into an unending mission to share a message of hope, faith, and the weight of the choices we make in life. Over time, this mission proved to be anything but straightforward, as Landon wrestled with the questions his experience raised and the responsibilities it placed on him. From the beginning, Landon's story stood apart. It wasn't sanitized or simplified. It was raw, deeply personal, and filled with details that challenged conventional understanding. Each time Landon recounted his journey, descriptions of golden streets that shimmered with their own light, radiant figures welcoming him, and an all-encompassing love. He wasn't just reliving his experience. He was bringing his audience into it, painting a picture so vivid that it felt impossible to dismiss. Yet it wasn't the light that made his story unforgettable. It was the shadow. The shadow, a dark, heavy presence that lurked at the edge of his heavenly vision, added an unsettling layer to Landon's account. It wasn't just a detail, it was a stark reminder that even in the most beautiful places, darkness could still exist. Landon never claimed to fully understand what the shadow was, but he couldn't forget it. For some, it symbolized the eternal struggle between good and evil, a reminder of the consequences of life's choices. For others, it raised more questions than answers, unsettling those who sought comfort in the idea of a perfect afterlife. As Landon's story spread, the reactions were just as layered as his experience. Families mourning lost loved ones found solace in his descriptions of unconditional love and the promise of reunion. Skeptics, however, dissected his every word, seeking to frame his account as the result of trauma or hallucination. For Landon, the skepticism didn't deter him. "I didn't come back to convince anyone," he often said. "I came back to share what I saw and let people make their own decisions." But sharing his story wasn't without its challenges. Every time Landon spoke, he carried the weight of his mission, the expectations of his listeners, and his own unanswered questions. Why had he been chosen to return? Why had he seen the shadow? Why had he been given this mission at all? These questions weren't just philosophical musings. They were deeply personal, and they shaped how Landon approached his role as a messenger. The shadow itself became an unavoidable focal point of Landon's testimony. Whenever he mentioned it, the room would fall silent. People leaned in, captivated by the mystery and the chilling implications of its presence. Landon didn't dwell on the shadow, but he didn't avoid it either. "It wasn't part of the peace I felt," he would explain. "It was separate, distant, but undeniably real." This duality of light and shadow came to define Landon's mission. His testimony wasn't simply about describing the beauty of heaven. It was about challenging people to consider the weight of their choices and the mysteries of what lies beyond. "It's not enough to tell people there's something waiting after this life," Landon said. "You have to make them understand why it matters now, in the lives they're living today." As Landon grew older, his memories of heaven deepened. New details emerged, as though his mind was slowly unpacking an experience too vast to comprehend all at once. These recollections added layers to his story, details about the figures who greeted him, the golden roads, and the immense love that surrounded him. Yet alongside these comforting memories, the shadow remained vivid. The shadow's significance grew over time. Landon began to describe it not just as a presence, but as a feeling, a coldness that contrasted sharply with the warmth and love of the rest of his vision. He didn't see it as a threat, but as a reminder of what was at stake. "I think the shadow was there to show me what happens when we don't choose the light," he said. For Landon's audiences, the shadow was as captivating as it was unsettling. Some believed it represented lost souls caught between worlds. Others thought it was a test, a reminder of the struggle to stay true to faith and purpose. Still, others dismissed it as a psychological response to trauma. Whatever it was, the shadow ensured that Landon's story was more than just a comforting glimpse into heaven. It was a challenge. Despite the weight of his mission, Landon remained steadfast in his resolve to share his experience. He spoke at churches, conferences, and community gatherings, his sincerity drawing people in, even if they didn't share his beliefs. "I don't think my mission is to make people believe me," Landon explained. "I think it's to give them something to think about, to consider for themselves." But the mission wasn't easy. Landon faced criticism from skeptics who dismissed his account as fabricated or a product of a child's imagination. Some pointed to scientific explanations, like oxygen deprivation or chemical reactions in the brain, as the root of his visions. Others accused his family of using his story for attention. These doubts weighed heavily on Julie, Landon's mother, who remained his fiercest defender. "I know my son," Julie often said. "He's not lying. What he's saying is the truth because I can see it in his eyes." Yet, for all the lives he touched, Landon knew his mission was far from over. The sense of urgency that had gripped him since his return never faded. He described it as a ticking clock, a reminder that time was limited and that his purpose was greater than any single moment or event. "I don't know why I was sent back," he admitted, "but I know I was sent back for a reason, and I'm going to spend my life trying to fulfill it." As the Radiant Hope Initiative gained traction, its reach began to expand. What started as a local effort quickly grew into a national movement, with chapters in multiple states and a growing online community that connects survivors from around the world. The Foundation's annual Radiant Hope Summit has become a gathering place for survivors, caregivers, and medical professionals, featuring keynote speakers, workshops, and panel discussions on the latest advancements in brain injury recovery. Landon's story remains a central part of the Foundation's mission. During the summit's closing ceremonies, he often takes the stage to remind attendees of the light that exists within even the darkest moments. "You're here because you're meant to be," he tells them. "Your story matters. Your life matters. And no matter what you've been through, there's hope." The Foundation has also partnered with researchers and medical institutions to explore the long-term effects of traumatic brain injuries and develop new tools for recovery. While Landon's experience offers a spiritual perspective, he is deeply committed to supporting scientific advancements that can improve the lives of survivors. "Faith and science don't have to be separate," he says. "Together they can do amazing things." As Landon's journey continued, it became clear that his mission wasn't just about describing what he had seen. It was about living it. Every choice he made, Every story he shared and every person he touched became part of the larger purpose he had been given. His testimony wasn't just a recounting of the past. It was a call to action, a reminder that light and darkness coexist, and that the choices we make define the paths we take. In the end, Landon's mission was as much about the present as it was about the afterlife. His story served as a beacon, not just for those seeking answers about what lies beyond, but for anyone searching for meaning, connection, and purpose in the here and now. And as he continued to walk the line between life and the infinite, Landon carried with him a message that was as profound as it was simple. Heaven is real, love is eternal, and every life matters. What do you think about Landon's incredible journey and his mission to help others? Do you believe stories like his can truly change lives? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your support means everything.